Jake Turner arrived with one goal: to shut this place down. By the end of the week, everything he believed in was on fire. The bell above the door of the hub rang with its familiar, uneven chime, more rasp than ring, a sound that belonged to this place as much as the exposed brick or the warped oak counter. Chloe heard it without looking up. She could tell who had entered by the rhythm alone. Regulars had patterns. This one didn't. Morning light spilled through the wide front windows, catching dust in the air and turning it gold. The cafe was already full in the quiet, living way it always was before 10. Neighbors leaning into conversations, a freelance designer claiming the corner table like a temporary office, an elderly couple sharing one muffin and two coffees as they did every Tuesday. The espresso machine hissed like a breathing animal, steady and comforting. "Order for Sam," Chloe called, sliding a cup across the counter. "Careful, it's hot." "Always is," Sam grinned. Then the space behind her shifted. "Chloe Martinez." The voice was calm, precise, and completely wrong for this room. She turned. The man standing there didn't look hostile. That was the unsettling part. Mid-30s, maybe. Clean lines in everything he wore, from his dark wool coat to the way he held a slim leather folder against his chest. His eyes moved slowly, cataloging the space. Load-bearing walls, ceiling height, the slight bow in the wooden floor near the window. He saw structure where others saw comfort. "Yes," Chloe said, wiping her hands on her apron. "My name is Jake Turner. I'm here on behalf of North Shore Development Group." A ripple moved through the cafe. The name carried weight. Not good weight. Jake opened the folder and placed a document on the counter with deliberate care, aligning it square to the wood grain as if precision might soften its meaning. "This is an official notice," he said. "The property located at this address has been approved for redevelopment. Demolition is scheduled pending final clearance." For a moment, Chloe thought she'd misheard him. Then she laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. "You're kidding." "I'm not." She picked up the paper, scanned the header, the seal, the language that tried to sound neutral while dismantling her life. Her jaw set. "This building is part of a historic district," she said. "You can't just knock it down." "There's a review process underway," Jake replied evenly. "The designation is being challenged." "By who?" "By parties with sufficient investment interest." Chloe slapped the paper back onto the counter. "That's a nice way of saying people with more money than sense." Jake didn't rise to it. "You have 60 days to vacate." The words landed like a dropped plate. Conversations died mid-sentence. The espresso machine hissed, unaware it had become the loudest thing in the room. "This cafe," Chloe began, then stopped. She forced herself to breathe. "This cafe feeds this neighborhood. It holds it together. I understand that it's meaningful to you," Jake said, "which is why my firm has authorized a compensation package." He placed a second document beside the first. Clean numbers, carefully calculated, enough to silence most arguments. Chloe stared at it without touching it. "You think this is generous," she said quietly. "You think you can buy 58 years with a payout. Sentiment doesn't factor into zoning law." "No," she shot back. "But people do." She leaned over the counter, lowering her voice. "This place raised money for funerals and weddings. It stayed open during blackouts. When the grocery store closed, we kept the lights on and fed whoever showed up. You don't bulldoze that and call it progress." Jake studied her, really studied her now. Not just the defiance, but the way the room seemed to orbit her. How people watched her for cues, waited for her reaction like it mattered. "What you're describing isn't sustainable," he said. "It doesn't scale." She finally picked up the compensation offer, folded it once, twice, each crease deliberate. "You're right," she said. "It doesn't scale. That's why it matters." She slid the folded paper back toward him. "Take your money. We're not selling." A man near the window stood up. "You can't do this," he said, voice shaking with anger. "This is our—" Jake lifted one hand, not looking at him. The gesture wasn't threatening, just practiced. The man hesitated, then sat back down, unsettled. Chloe noticed everything. "So this is how it works," she said. "You walk in with papers and expect us to disappear quietly." "I expect you to make a rational decision," Jake replied. She turned to the room. "Everyone here. This cafe is under threat. And if anyone thinks I'm going to let it go without a fight, you don't know me." Phones came out. Someone started filming. The energy shifted from shock to something sharper. Jake closed his folder. "This doesn't have to become adversarial," he said. Chloe met his eyes. "It already is." He paused at the door, hand resting on the handle. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not irritation, but hesitation. A recalculation. "I'll be in touch," he said. When the bell rang again and the door shut behind him, the cafe released a collective breath. Chloe stayed where she was, palms flat against the counter she'd refinished herself years ago. Her heart was racing, not with fear, but with resolve. Outside, Jake stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary. Through the glass, he saw the crowd tighten around Chloe, drawn to her like gravity. An obstacle, he told himself. Yet as he walked away, the numbers in his folder felt strangely incomplete, as if they were missing something he hadn't known to measure. The protest did not begin loudly. It began with a chalkboard. Chloe dragged it out onto the sidewalk just after sunrise, the legs scraping against the concrete, the sound sharp enough to make a few early customers look up from their phones. She didn't erase yesterday's menu. The ghost of latte prices and croissants remained beneath the message she wrote in slow, deliberate strokes. This place is not for sale. She leaned the board against the cafe's brick wall and stepped back. For a moment, the street was quiet. Then someone stopped. Then another. A woman took a photo. A delivery driver nodded once, approvingly, before moving on. By 9 o'clock, a hand-painted sign appeared in the window next door. By 10, a local blogger was filming in front of the hub, narrating with practiced outrage. By noon, the hashtag was everywhere. Jake saw it on his phone before he heard about it officially. He was in a temporary office 3 blocks away, reviewing environmental impact summaries with the kind of detached focus that had built his career. When the notification buzzed, he almost ignored it. Almost. But the cafe's familiar brick facade filled his screen, and beneath it, Chloe's words burned white and defiant. Public protest, his assistant said from the doorway, already tense. Local media's picking it up. If this escalates, legal will recommend. I know, Jake said, cutting in. His voice stayed calm, but something inside him tightened. I'll handle it. When he arrived, the hub looked different than it had the day before. Louder, sharper, alive in a way spreadsheets never captured. People stood clustered outside, coffee cups in hand, talking about zoning laws and community history like they were lifelong experts. Chloe stood at the center of it, grounded, unmovable. When she saw him, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, just readiness. This is exactly what I warned you about, Jake said once they were inside, the door closing behind them and muting the noise outside. Public obstruction. You're putting yourself at legal risk. She laughed once, short and humorless. No, she said. I'm putting you at risk. Big difference. Jake glanced around. The cafe was full, not just with customers, but with intention. Flyers stacked near the register. Old photographs pinned along the wall. This place wasn't just selling coffee. It was selling belonging. I'm not here to argue philosophy, he said. I'm here to prevent this from turning into a lawsuit. And I'm here to make sure you can't bulldoze us quietly. Chloe shot back. So congratulations. We're both doing our jobs. He studied her for a long moment. She was infuriatingly composed for someone staging a public rebellion. No theatrics. No cracks. Fine, Jake said finally. You want transparency? She raised an eyebrow. I'll give you a week, he continued. A full audit. Structural integrity. Historical significance. Compliance. Everything. You oversee it. If the building meets the threshold for preservation, demolition pauses. And if it doesn't, she asked. Then the order stands. Silence stretched between them. Audit under whose authority? Chloe asked carefully. Mine, Jake replied. And yours? Joint oversight. No press interference. No stunts. She searched his face, looking for the trick. Found none. Only calculation, restrained and precise. 1 week, she repeated. You walk my streets. You read my records. You listen. Jake nodded. 1 week. She extended her hand, slow, deliberate. This isn't a truce, she said. It's a test. Jake took her hand. Her grip was firm, unyielding. I know, he said. That's why I agreed. Outside, the noise swelled again as the door opened. The city pressed back in, restless and watching. Neither of them noticed it yet, but the line between opposition and proximity had already begun to blur. Chloe unlocked the side door to the municipal records building with a key that looked older than the lock itself. The hallway inside smelled of dust, paper, and something faintly metallic, like time had oxidized here and been left untouched. Fluorescent lights flickered awake one by one as they walked, their footsteps echoing in a space clearly never meant to host urgency. This is where paperwork comes to die, Chloe said, not looking back. If you're expecting neat folders and clean narratives, you're about to be disappointed. Jake adjusted the strap of his laptop bag on his shoulder. Disappointment is usually where the truth starts. She shot him a look, sharp and assessing, then turned back toward the rows of filing cabinets. Metal drawers stretched along the walls like ribs, each labeled in faded ink. District rezoning. Structural assessments. Deferred maintenance. They split up without ceremony. For the first hour, the only sounds were sliding drawers, the soft thud of binders against wooden tables, the occasional sigh when a document refused to line up with expectation. Chloe worked with practiced efficiency, fingers moving confidently through decades of permits and community grants. Jake, by contrast, mapped everything, dates, contractors, inspection gaps, into clean columns on his screen. It was supposed to be adversarial. Instead, it became synchronized. "You missed a renovation in '98, Chloe said at one point, leaning over his shoulder. They replaced the west-facing support beam. Jake frowned, pulled up another file. "That explains the load variance," he muttered. "But it doesn't explain why the depreciation curve spikes in 2019. She straightened. "Spikes how?" He turned the screen toward her. "Artificially. Maintenance costs jump without corresponding invoices. Someone wanted the building to look unstable." Chloe's jaw tightened. "You're saying the numbers were manipulated?" "I'm saying the math is lying," Jake replied. "And math doesn't do that by accident." They moved to the hub after lunch, carrying boxes of copied files and their own unspoken questions. The cafe was quieter than usual, the protest energy replaced by a tense vigilance. Regulars nodded at Chloe, eyed Jake with suspicion, then returned to their cups. They set up at a corner table. Jake spread his documents out methodically, creating order out of chaos. Chloe countered by pulling down framed photographs from the wall, old images of the street, the cafe under different names, different owners, the same heart. "This building survived 2 recessions and a fire," she said, laying a photo beside his spreadsheets. "But your report says it's structurally compromised beyond reasonable repair." Jake exhaled slowly. "I didn't write that line. But your company signed off on it." "Yes." He hesitated, which means someone upstream wanted that conclusion. The realization settled heavily between them. They worked through the afternoon, then into early evening. Outside, the light shifted from gold to gray, the cafe windows reflecting the city's slow turn toward night. Chloe noticed Jake's focus fracture once or twice, his eyes lingering not on the numbers, but on the space itself. The way people leaned into each other. The way the counter bore scratches from decades of use. "You're thinking like an engineer," she said quietly. "And you're thinking like an investor," he replied without looking up. "You just won't admit it." She almost smiled. The final inconsistency appeared just before closing. Jake stared at the screen, unmoving. "Terminal valuation was rerouted," he said. "Not to the developer." Chloe frowned. "Then where?" He typed a few more commands, pulling data from buried subledgers. The name that surfaced wasn't one he recognized, but the structure of the transaction was unmistakable. "A third party," he said slowly. "Not listed. Not public. They're bleeding the numbers dry to drive the land price down." Chloe's hands curled into fists. "So the demolition isn't the goal?" "No," Jake said. "It's the cover." For the first time since they'd met, Chloe didn't respond with anger. She sank into the chair opposite him, the weight of the truth pressing down hard. "You could walk away," she said. "Turn this in, blame the data, let it burn." Jake closed the laptop. "I could," he agreed. Their eyes met. The air between them felt charged, not with romance, not yet, but with something equally dangerous. Choice. Outside, the cafe lights flickered on, casting warm pools of light onto the sidewalk. Inside, 2 people who were never meant to be on the same side stared at the same problem, and, reluctantly, at each other. The audit had stopped being procedural. It had become personal. The city changed after midnight. Traffic thinned into distant murmurs, neon signs hummed instead of shouted, and the old district seemed to exhale, finally free of daytime scrutiny. Chloe locked the hub's front door and pulled the curtains halfway down, leaving just enough of the street visible to feel connected, not exposed. Jake watched her move with the same attention he gave spreadsheets, observing patterns, efficiency, intent. She didn't waste motion. Nothing about her was ornamental. "You sure this is legal?" he asked, glancing at the stack of archival folders she'd brought in. She shrugged. "It's public record, just inconveniently buried. Night makes it easier to think." They spread their work across the cafe like conspirators. Old zoning maps overlapped with digital blueprints on Jake's tablet. Coffee replaced water. Silence replaced friction. At first, they stayed in their lanes. Chloe translated history. Why a wall existed where it shouldn't, how a staircase had been sealed after a flood, which renovations were cosmetic and which were community-funded. Jake countered with structural logic, pointing out stress lines, outdated load assumptions, financial red flags hidden behind accounting language meant to discourage questions. "You see decay," she said at one point, leaning over the table. "I see survival. And I see risk," Jake replied calmly. "But not the kind they're claiming." She paused, then nodded once. "So we agree on that." It felt like a small victory. The clock ticked past 1 a.m. Rain began tapping against the windows, soft at first, then steadier, blurring the streetlights into long streaks of amber. The cafe smelled of espresso, paper, and something warmer, shared effort, maybe. Chloe rubbed her temples. What if we didn't tear it down? She said suddenly, more to the room than to him. What if we reinforced the core, modernized utilities, preserved the facade, kept the soul, but fixed the bones? Jake leaned back, considering. Cost would be higher up front, he said. But long-term value, cultural, commercial, it could outperform demolition within a decade. She looked at him, surprised. You just argued for sentiment. No, he corrected. I argued for sustainable return. A beat passed. That's the same thing, she said quietly. Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away first. They moved closer to the same side of the table, not by agreement, just gravity. Chloe pointed at a section of the map. Jake traced a finger along it, stopping inches from her hand. Neither acknowledged it. Both felt it. You know, she said, softer now. When you first walked in here, I thought you were just another suit sent to erase us. And I thought you were clinging to nostalgia, Jake replied. Emotion over feasibility. She smiled faintly. Turns out we were both wrong. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and restrained, like the city clearing its throat. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows, sealing them inside their bubble of light and paper. Jake broke the silence. If this goes public, there will be consequences. For you. For me. Chloe met his gaze steadily. Everything worth keeping has a cost. For the first time, Jake smiled without restraint. It was brief, almost surprised, as if he hadn't realized he still could. They worked until the storm softened and the sky began to lighten at the edges. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the table was covered in a single, shared narrative, one that didn't fit neatly into corporate summaries or protest slogans. When Jake finally packed up his tablet, his movements were slower, reluctant. This could work, he said. If someone doesn't try to stop it. Chloe locked the last file away. They will. Outside, the rain had washed the streets clean. Inside, something fragile but real had taken shape. Not trust, not yet, but the outline of it. And for both of them, the night had done something dangerous. It had made compromise feel possible. Morning arrived without ceremony. The rain had scrubbed the streets clean, but tension clung to the district like humidity. Chloe opened the hub early, more out of habit than need. Her hands moved automatically, grinder, filter, kettle, while her mind replayed fragments of the night before. Shared maps, shared silence, shared possibility. She was wiping down the counter when her phone vibrated. No name, no number, just a file icon and a single line of text. You're fighting the wrong enemy. Her pulse quickened. She didn't open it immediately. Experience had taught her that some truths demanded preparation, even when you didn't know what kind. She waited until Jake arrived. He walked in quieter than usual, suit jacket folded over his arm instead of worn, eyes alert in a way that suggested he hadn't slept much either. He paused when he saw her expression. What is it? He asked. Chloe slid the phone across the counter. That came in 10 minutes ago. Jake frowned and opened the file. The cafe seemed to shrink as he scrolled. Bank transfers. Shell companies. Ownership layers stacked so deliberately complex they bordered on artistic. Dates that predated his company's involvement. A financial structure designed not to build, but to destabilize. To quietly depress land value. To trigger forced sales. At the center of it all, a blind trust. No name. No face. Just a pattern. Jake exhaled slowly. This isn't ours. Chloe watched him carefully. But it's using you. Yes, he said. And that's worse. She folded her arms. Did you know? The question landed between them, sharp and unavoidable. Jake met her gaze immediately. No. She didn't answer right away. He continued, voice steady but lower now. If I had known there was a shadow controller manipulating capital flows like this, I wouldn't have taken the assignment. This isn't development. It's extraction. Funny, Chloe said quietly. That's what I told you on day one. I know, he replied. And I was wrong to dismiss it. She turned away, gripping the counter harder than necessary. You still work for them. For now. That makes you compromised. Yes. Silence stretched. Outside, a delivery truck idled, then moved on. Life continued, indifferent to revelations. You could walk away, Chloe said. Save yourself. Jake shook his head. If I walk away now, they'll replace me with someone who won't ask questions. And this, he gestured at the phone, will keep happening. Quietly, she studied him. So what are you saying? I'm saying, he replied carefully, that if this leak is real, and it looks real, then your cafe, this district, the whole demolition narrative, it's a smokescreen. The real play is financial collapse, followed by acquisition. And you were the front man, she said. Yes. The words sat heavy in the air. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment. Anger flared, sharp, instinctive, but beneath it was something colder. Betrayal not proven, but suddenly plausible. And that scared her more. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then slid it toward her. An internal memo. Confidential. Explicit instructions to ignore community valuation metrics and accelerate failure indicators. "If I forward that," he said, "I burn every bridge I have left in that firm." Chloe stared at the screen. "You'd be finished." "Yes." She looked up at him. "And you're showing it to me because this stopped being a job the moment I realized they weren't just erasing buildings," Jake said. "They were erasing people. And because if I lose everything professional, I want it to be for something that actually matters." Emotion flickered across her face before she could stop it. She turned the phone back toward him. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. "But I believe you didn't know. That was not absolution. But it was something." "Who sent the leak?" Jake asked. Chloe shook her head. "No idea. Someone scared. Or someone strategic. Either way," he said, "they've just declared war." She straightened. "Then we stop reacting. And start proving," Jake added. Their eyes met, aligned not by trust yet, but by necessity. Outside, the city was waking fully now. Shopfronts opening. Voices rising. A normal morning, built on foundations most people never questioned. Chloe gathered the documents into a single folder. "If this shadow investor thinks we're isolated," she said, "they've underestimated this place." Jake watched her, admiration mixing with something more dangerous. "And if they think I'll protect them," he replied, "they've misunderstood me." The alliance wasn't sealed, but it had begun. And somewhere behind layers of money and silence, someone had just realized they were no longer invisible. Jake didn't return to his hotel that night. Instead, he went back to his temporary office, an impersonal rented space with white walls, cheap furniture, and a view of nothing important. It was the kind of place designed to host decisions without memory. That, he realized grimly, was exactly why it worked so well for what he needed to do next. He locked the door behind him, turned off the overhead lights, and powered up his laptop. For years, he had been proud of how clean his work was. Every model precise, every assumption justified, every conclusion defensible. Now, as he opened archived files and internal systems he had never questioned before, he felt something close to shame. Not because he had been malicious, but because he had been efficient. He started with timelines. Land valuation reports didn't just dip. They dipped in sequence. One district, then another. Always after the same pattern. Feasibility study, risk amplification, sudden regulatory concern, followed by unavoidable withdrawal of investors. On paper, it looked organic. In reality, it was choreography. Jake cross-referenced ownership changes. Shell companies bloomed and vanished like algae. Different names. Same legal firms. Same accounting tricks. Same offshore endpoints. Whoever the shadow investor was, they weren't improvising. They were repeating a perfected method. By midnight, he stopped pretending this was about Chloe's Café. This was systemic. And his firm, his reputation, was the blade, not the hand. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The rational move was clear. Document irregularities internally, escalate discreetly, protect himself. That was the Jake who had survived boardrooms and hostile takeovers. But that Jake required silence. And silence was no longer neutral. His phone buzzed. A message from Chloe. No drama. No accusation. Just, "Did you find anything?" He stared at the screen longer than necessary before typing back. "Yes. Enough to know this goes deeper than I thought. We need to talk. Tomorrow." 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. "Tomorrow at the hub. Before opening." He agreed. Sleep came in fragments. By morning, Jake had built something dangerous, a parallel audit. One that didn't aim to justify demolition, but to expose intent. He flagged transaction chains, annotated motive, highlighted the exact moment where legitimate development turned into financial predation. And he did something else, something irreversible. He copied the files, encrypted them, stored them somewhere his company didn't control. When he arrived at the hub, the cafe was still dark inside. Chloe was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees untouched between them. She looked tired, but focused, the kind of exhaustion that sharpens rather than dulls. Jake didn't waste time. He laid everything out. Not dramatically, not emotionally. Precisely. He explained how land values were being manipulated, how public pressure and engineered risk narratives were used to force owners into selling, how his company's role was intentionally compartmentalized so no single consultant saw the full picture. "And now you do," Chloe said. "Yes." She folded her hands. "What happens if you push this?" "My firm will deny knowledge," he said. "The shadow investor will retreat behind legal layers. And I will become a liability." "In other words," she said. You'll be erased. Jake nodded once. Professionally, yes. Chloe studied him, searching for something. Hesitation, calculation, an escape clause. She didn't find one. You could still walk away, she said. You could give me the data anonymously and disappear back into your world. I thought about that, Jake admitted. But it wouldn't be enough. Not without someone on the inside willing to testify to intent. And that someone is you. Yes. The words landed heavy, final. Chloe leaned back, exhaling slowly. Do you know what scares me most? Jake waited. Not that they want to destroy this place, she continued, but how easily they almost did. With forms, meetings, smiles, no villains, just momentum. That's how it works, he said quietly. No one feels responsible. She looked at him then, not as an adversary, not even as an ally, but as someone standing at a threshold. And you? She asked. Do you feel responsible? Jake didn't answer immediately. He thought of his early career, the praise, the promotions, the way he'd learned to equate distance with objectivity. Yes, he said finally. I do now. That was the moment something shifted. Not romance. Not forgiveness. Alignment. Then here's the problem, Chloe said. If we move openly, they'll strike back. Quietly or not. And they won't come for documents first. Jake's jaw tightened. They'll come for leverage. For you, she corrected. And for this place. He nodded. Which means we can't act like victims. No, Chloe said. We act like architects. They spent the next hours mapping possibilities. Legal angles. Media pressure. Community leverage. Weak points in the shadow investor structure. Places where opacity became vulnerability. Jake watched her as she worked. Not emotional. Strategic. Calm under pressure. This wasn't a woman clinging to a cafe. This was someone defending a system of human value he had spent years abstracting away. At one point, she stopped and looked at him. You understand, she said. I do. And you're still here. Yes. She held his gaze for a long second, then nodded once. Then we're in this together. But understand something, Jake. Once we move forward, there's no clean exit. He gave a small, humorless smile. I stopped believing in clean exits yesterday. Outside, the street began to fill. Neighbors passing. Familiar faces. A living network, unaware it was already under threat. Jake closed his laptop. We should assume they're watching. They are, Chloe said. They always are. Neither of them said what both understood next. The investigation phase was over. The choice had been made. And choices, once noticed by powerful people, had consequences. The first sign that something was wrong was the smell. Chloe noticed it before she saw anything. Sharp, chemical, out of place beneath the familiar layers of coffee, wood, and warm bread. It cut through the morning air like a warning that arrived a second too late. She looked up from the counter just as the bell over the door rang, not with its usual clean chime, but with a dull, uneven jolt. Jake was near the back, pretending to read emails on his phone while actually watching reflections in the window. He caught the shift in her posture instantly. Her shoulders tightened. Her gaze snapped toward the door. That alone set his nerves on edge. 3 people entered. Not locals. Too clean. Too deliberate. They didn't look around the cafe the way strangers usually did. Curious, uncertain. They scanned it like an asset. Like a space already measured. Jake moved without thinking, stepping closer to the counter, placing himself slightly between Chloe and the entrance. He kept his voice low. Do you smell that? She murmured. Yes, he said. Stay calm. One of the men lingered near the door, blocking it casually, while another drifted toward the far wall, fingers brushing a stack of flyers advertising community meetings. The third stopped near the center, eyes flicking toward the ceiling, the exits, the windows. Not customers. Not vandals. A message. The man near the door struck a match. It flared too bright in the dim cafe. Jake reacted before Chloe could speak. He grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but firmly, and pulled her sideways, away from the counter, just as the match dropped. It didn't ignite the room the way fire does in movies. Instead, it caught fast, hungry, licking at a treated surface near the trash bin, smoke blooming instantly. Now, Jake said, already moving. Chloe didn't freeze. She never froze. She vaulted the counter with practiced ease, grabbing the small fire extinguisher from beneath the sink as Jake shoved a chair into the path of the man by the door. The extinguisher hissed white, choking the flames before they could spread, filling the cafe with bitter foam and smoke. Out, Jake said sharply, steering her toward the back hallway. One of the men lunged, not to stop them, but to grab something. The register drawer. Pointless theft, just enough to muddy intent. Jake slammed the emergency door open and pushed Chloe through. The alley behind the cafe was narrow, damp, cluttered with bins and shadows. He followed, yanking the door shut, just as something heavy struck it from the inside. They ran. Not blindly, purposefully. Chloe led, cutting left, then right, weaving through service alleys she'd known since childhood. Jake stayed close, one hand hovering near her shoulder, eyes tracking movement behind them, calculating angles, exits, probabilities. A car engine roared to life nearby. Here, Chloe said, skidding to a stop beside a rusted gate. She shoved it open, pulling Jake through just as headlights flared at the mouth of the alley. They didn't stop running until the noise faded. When they finally did, they were behind an old storage building, pressed against cold brick, breathing hard. Chloe's hands were shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Jake noticed before she did and gently took them, grounding them between his palms. They weren't trying to hurt us, she said quietly. Not really. No, Jake replied. They were testing boundaries and sending a signal. Yes. She pulled her hands back, anger flashing across her face. They touched my cafe. I know. That place is, she stopped, swallowed. It's not just a building. Jake met her eyes. I know. There was no speech, no confession, no dramatic vow. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Marcus, he said when the line connected. I need a favor. Off the record. And I need it now. He turned slightly away, lowering his voice, but Chloe caught fragments. Legal language, emergency injunctions, fire inspections, surveillance requests. Every word was precise, controlled, weaponized competence. When he hung up, she stared at him. You're burning bridges, she said. I already did, he replied. This just makes it visible. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Fire, not police. The cafe would survive. She knew that, but the message had been delivered clearly enough. They stood there for a moment longer, the city humming around them, unaware of how close it had come to losing something irreplaceable. You didn't hesitate, Chloe said finally. Jake shook his head. Neither did you. She looked at him then, not as a partner, not as an ally, but as someone who had stepped into danger without calculating the personal cost. That was a line, she said. They crossed it. And so did I, he answered. She nodded once. Good. There was no kiss. No embrace. Just the quiet, undeniable understanding that whatever this had been before, strategy, alignment, necessity, it had become something else. Something personal. And from this point on, there would be no more warnings. Chloe and Jake moved quickly through the narrow streets, their minds synchronized despite the chaos. Every step was deliberate, calculated, their combined knowledge of the city and its hidden corners giving them an edge over those who thought they controlled the game. The plan they had crafted in whispered meetings, over late-night coffees and hastily scrawled notes, was about to be set into motion. Operation Save the District. Chloe tapped her phone, sending the final confirmation to local journalists she had briefed on the syndicate's manipulations. The media presence would shine a light too bright for any backroom deal to survive. She glanced at Jake, noting the subtle shift in his demeanor. Where once he had calculated risk purely in numbers, now he considered timing, human factors, and trust. The transformation had begun, and he had chosen a side. They arrived at the hub, which now served as the command center. Chloe's team of volunteers, neighbors, and community leaders waited, their faces a mix of apprehension and resolve. Jake pulled out the corporate files he had gathered, the evidence of manipulated contracts, falsified investments, and financial trickery. Together, they began to dismantle the syndicate's leverage, one carefully coordinated step at a time. Chloe's voice was firm as she instructed the volunteers to spread information to media outlets and organize blockades at key sites. Every movement we make must be visible. Every action counts. They depend on secrecy, we will destroy it. Jake moved among them, interpreting financial schematics and explaining the vulnerabilities in the investors' contracts, highlighting clauses that could be legally contested and deadlines that could be exploited. His words carried authority, but now they were underpinned by purpose beyond personal gain. As night fell, the city's lights cast long shadows over their operation. They coordinated phone calls, emails, and covert meetings, ensuring that every ally, every journalist, every neighbor understood their role. The tension was palpable, but the rhythm of their collaboration felt almost seamless. Chloe noticed the small gestures, the way Jake handed out tasks with a calm authority, the subtle nods that signaled trust, the way his eyes scanned not just the documents but the people around him. She realized, almost with surprise, that the man she had once viewed as a rigid outsider had become a partner in every sense. Intellectually, strategically, and increasingly, personally. Hours passed. The final legal obstacles were identified, loopholes exposed, and the syndicate's key players caught off guard by the precision and speed of the coordinated effort. Chloe and Jake moved as one, a seamless blend of passion and calculation, heart, and mind. By the time the first rays of dawn hit the city, the district was secured. The syndicate's plans were blocked, the community informed, and the momentum firmly in their favor. They stood on the steps of the hub, exhausted but triumphant, side by side, looking out at the streets that would wake to a new day. Chloe turned to Jake, the weight of the night pressing down, yet tempered by a flicker of satisfaction. "We did it," she said softly, though she didn't need to add that it wasn't just about saving the buildings. It was about protecting the people, the community, and something far more intangible: hope. Jake smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that held both pride and something deeper, something unspoken that lingered between them. "Yes," he replied, his voice low, carrying a promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. In that quiet moment, amidst the remnants of a long night, the foundation of a new partnership, both professional and personal, was cemented. They had fought not just for survival, but for justice, for integrity, and for each other, forging a bond that would guide the next steps of their shared journey. The city council chamber buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation and the faint hum of cameras recording every moment. Chloe and Jake arrived early, carrying stacks of meticulously organized evidence, contracts, emails, and financial records that exposed the manipulations of the shadow investor. Each document represented hours of labor, risk, and careful strategy. The stakes had never been higher. One misstep could unravel everything they had worked for, and the district's future hung in the balance. The public gallery filled quickly with community members, journalists, and curious onlookers. Chloe felt the familiar mix of nerves and determination tightening in her chest. She glanced at Jake, noting the quiet focus in his eyes. Gone was the man who had arrived in the city detached and calculating. Now he moved with purpose, guided by conscience as much as intellect. Together, they were a force honed through trials, trust, and shared conviction. The hearing began, a formal and intimidating setting with council members poised behind polished desks. Chloe stepped forward first, her voice calm but unwavering as she recounted the history of the district, its cultural significance, and the manipulations that threatened its integrity. Every word was precise, every example drawn from the lived experience of the community she loved. Jake followed, presenting the financial evidence with clarity and authority. He explained the complex web of transactions, highlighting the shadow investor's hidden control and the falsified reports his company had unknowingly processed. His presentation was meticulous, each figure linked to concrete outcomes, demonstrating both the legality and the morality of their argument. As they spoke, murmurs spread through the room. Council members leaned forward, journalists scribbled furiously, and the community watched, united in silent support. Chloe and Jake moved seamlessly, their partnership evident in the way they referenced each other's points, finishing thoughts where the other left off. The tension of prior nights, the audits, the investigations, the threats, culminated here in a controlled yet palpable energy. When the shadow investor's representative attempted to dismiss the claims, citing technicalities and legal jargon, Jake countered with precision, exposing every loophole they had exploited. Chloe reinforced the human element, describing the potential displacement, the loss of heritage, and the ripple effects across the community. Together, they built an argument that was both airtight and deeply persuasive, appealing to law, ethics, and empathy. Hours passed in intense deliberation. Questions were fired from council members, some probing, some skeptical, but Chloe and Jake responded with calm coordination. Every answer strengthened their credibility. Every revelation eroded the credibility of the shadow investor. The community's support was unmistakable, their presence a silent reinforcement of the stakes at hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the council voted. The result was decisive. The project was halted, the district preserved, and the shadow investor's influence exposed. A wave of relief and exhilaration washed over the room. Chloe allowed herself a brief smile, her gaze finding Jake's across the chamber. He returned it, a mixture of pride, respect, and something unspoken that lingered in the space between them. As the hearing adjourned, the crowd spilled into the streets, celebrating the victory. Journalists swarmed to capture statements. Neighbors embraced, and the district itself seemed to breathe again, a collective exhale after weeks of tension. Chloe and Jake stepped aside, letting the moment settle. They had saved more than buildings. They had preserved the soul of a community and proven the power of collaboration, courage, and moral conviction. Jake placed a hand lightly on Chloe's shoulder. "We did it," he said softly, the words carrying the weight of their shared struggle and triumph. Chloe nodded, a subtle smile forming, acknowledging both the victory and the bond that had grown stronger through every challenge. The night descended quietly, but their victory resonated far beyond the council chamber. It was a turning point, a moment where justice, partnership, and the unwavering spirit of a community had converged. And for Chloe and Jake, it was a moment that would define not only their professional triumph, but the beginning of something far more enduring: trust, respect, and the hint of a deeper connection that neither could yet fully name. The first light of dawn filtered through the streets of the district, casting a soft glow over rooftops, cobblestones, and the familiar facade of Chloe's Café, the hub. The air carried a crisp freshness, the calm after weeks of tension, fear, and uncertainty. Jake walked beside Chloe, their pace unhurried, both taking in the reborn vibrancy of the neighborhood they had fought to protect. The sense of accomplishment hung between them, mingled with something more personal, a quiet intimacy that had grown alongside their shared struggle. Plans for the future filled their conversation. Chloe spoke of community gardens, restored architecture, and events to celebrate the district's heritage. Jake, once a man whose life revolved around spreadsheets and contracts, now envisioned ethical projects that respected people, history, and the environment. Together, they sketched out strategies, combining his financial expertise with her knowledge and passion for the community. Each idea built upon the other, a fusion of practicality and vision, showing how different strengths could align toward a single goal. Inside the hub, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked bread invited them in. The cafe had survived the threats and now thrived, its windows gleaming, its tables filled with familiar faces. Chloe moved with ease behind the counter, taking orders and sharing smiles, while Jake observed, occasionally lending a hand, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known in his corporate world. Their partnership extended beyond work. Moments of shared laughter, quiet understanding, and subtle touches revealed the depth of the bond they had formed. It was no longer only about saving the district. It was about building a life together, grounded in trust, respect, and shared purpose. They moved seamlessly between professional and personal spheres, each interaction reinforcing the connection that had grown through adversity. The community gathered outside, curious about the changes and eager to contribute. Chloe and Jake walked among them, listening, advising, and celebrating small victories: new murals, repaired sidewalks, and the planting of trees in previously neglected areas. The neighborhood, once threatened by greed and negligence, began to feel whole again, its pulse steady and strong. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over streets and alleys, Jake and Chloe paused at the corner of the cafe. He turned to her, voice soft but certain. "We've done more than save buildings. We've created something that lasts, together." Chloe met his gaze, the weight of everything they had endured reflected in her eyes. "And it's only the beginning," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "There's still so much we can do." The hub bustled around them, a living testament to perseverance, community, and renewed hope. For Jake, staying in the district was no longer a compromise. It was a choice, one he made willingly, embracing a new life rooted in ethics, collaboration, and love. Chloe felt the same certainty. Together, they had forged a foundation that could withstand challenges yet to come. As afternoon light streamed through the cafe windows, casting patterns across wooden floors and polished tables, Jake and Chloe shared a quiet moment of reflection. The streets outside buzzed with life, laughter, and the small triumphs of daily existence. Their vision for the district had become reality, but more importantly, their partnership, professional, personal, and deeply human, had found its footing. With hands brushing, subtle yet deliberate, they returned to their work, planning, guiding, and nurturing the community. Every decision, every action carried the imprint of shared values and mutual respect. The hub remained a symbol of their journey, a beacon for the neighborhood, and a reminder of what could be achieved when courage, trust, and dedication converged. The day closed with a sense of completeness and promise. The district thrived, the hub flourished, and Chloe and Jake stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. In their unity, the past struggles were honored, present victories celebrated, and a future filled with potential awaited. One shaped not by profit alone, but by vision, compassion, and the enduring power of collaboration and love. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.